Welcome to the Mundaria Legends podcast. I am your host and narrator, Michael Stone. Today we begin our first season, and I cannot tell you how honored I am to have you join us. Though we have only just begun as a very small studio, we have had people across the world listen to our first teaser episode a few weeks ago, including the UK, Mexico, and even Argentina. And the reception has been outstanding to see. As promised, this show's stories are about your ideas as we feature high fantasy characters some of you have suggested to us at MundariaLegends.com. Remember, if you enjoy what we're doing, there's 3 easy things you can do to help support the show. First, you can leave your rating and a review on the podcast platform you're using. Second, you can support us directly by subscribing to our Patreon page and becoming a patron, where you can earn awesome members-only benefits like merch from the show, a higher chance to have your character ideas featured in one of our episodes, and even exclusive special episodes. Last, but perhaps the most important way to support us, is to tell others you know about the show. Now, I am excited to bring to you our story featuring a character called Loella, proposed by Rebecca from Wyoming in the US of A. Now, without further ado, we bring you Episode 2, State Affairs. A partially charred human lay on a medical cot. He likely would have been screaming in pain had he been awake, and had his throat been spared the flames the majority of his torso had been struck with. There was a time when the strikingly beautiful merwoman Senator Loella would have found it altogether too easy to ignore such uncomfortable realities of war. But today, of all days, she would not be able to afford that luxury. And so, while healers in the medical tent rushed from patient to patient from the most recent attack, administering the power of the God Shard of healing, Loella instead chose to focus her attention on this one human. She of course understood the basic rules of triage. Healers treat the patients who are both most likely to survive with the greatest need first. Once the patient will survive, the healer moves on to the next highest priority patient. If a patient wasn't likely to survive even with treatment, they would be abandoned. What troubled Loella was, she didn't know in which category the nameless soldier in front of her fell into. Had he already been treated to the point that he could just barely live on? Did the healers already deem him a lost cause? Or perhaps, was he still waiting to be seen? A human runner with plain black hair, wearing a clerk's brown garb, came to Loella's palatine, and knowing already what it likely meant, the senator's yellow-orange fins at her temples flared open in irritation. I thought I had told him I would meet him in the medical tent. He's asking to meet outside, I assume? Yes, Senator, the runner admitted. Loella could tell from the runner's face that she was also reluctantly aware of the king's reticence to enter the tent. Tell me, do you know if he ever comes in here? Inquired Loella, careful to avoid any accusation in her voice. The runner opened her mouth once, then closed it. She looked downward. Not this medical tent. He does often go to the medical tent closer to the shore, I know, to visit with the injured merfolk. I imagine perhaps that in this more cramped space, his palatine being larger than yours? The woman offered. Loella shook her head. Don't feel the need to excuse him, and I have likely already troubled you enough as it is. Lead the way. The runner nodded, and before turning away to guide Loella's palatine, she looked up at the senator. Milady, if it pleases you, I wish to offer you my condolences for your loss. Ever since Prince Kyrall's existence became common knowledge, including your secretly planned engagement to him, the heart of every woman, including us human women, has ached for you. I hope we find him soon for you. Loella kept a straight face, slowly giving a nod. Such well-wishing had become commonplace during these past several months, and while she did appreciate the show of support, talking about her relationship with Prince Kyrall wasn't something that would help her focus on her mission right at that moment. She needed to be calm, poised, and alert. Not something those memories would help her do. Loella motioned for her palanquin bearers to carry her forward down the aisle of cots to follow the king's runner out of the tent. Not a few eyes turned from healers and patients as they gazed at the mercrab bearers. Loella allowed herself the barest of grins as she proceeded down the aisle. Perhaps the only such grin she'd entertained today. King Aglam was waiting for her, reclining in his own extravagant palatine as usual, with his 4 customary navy blue-clad human guards, in addition to the human palatine bearers. He did his best to ignore the senator's mercrab bearers as he greeted her. "Senator Loella, I understand you wished to speak with me." The senator bowed her head and raised her spear briefly in customary deference. "Yes, I have taken great pains to come to the battlefront today." The king was grumpier than usual today. Something had him irked. Gruffly he responded, "Yes, I am well aware. It isn't everyone who can get my wife to harp on me to gain special favors like this. I trust you have a good reason for having me bring you here. Do I get to know what you are really up to now? Or did you lie to my wife and simply wish to use this chance to try to pull our forces out to satiate your pacifism?" Loella rebuffed. "You should trust your wife's good judgment, sir. Because you have made it clear you wish to pursue this senseless violence to its conclusion, I have taken the initiative to help you bring about that conclusion now." Aglam's crown tipped forward as he scrunched his forehead in skepticism. "Now, you claim to be able to bring this conflict to an end now?" Loella braced herself for what she knew the king's reaction was going to be. "Yes, that is today." Loella paused, again gathering herself to reveal what she had done. "I have been in communication with the Crucian embassy. We have reached a solution." The king snapped. He thrust a trident that he had been holding towards Loella until it was mere inches from her throat. His guards followed suit, also raising their weapons towards the senator. "Death sight take you! You had no right! We are at war with these monsters, and you dare go behind my back to treat with them! I could have you hanged for this atop Dock Spire back at home for this! Explain what you have done!" Healers and other guards who stood nearby froze, alarmed at the sudden outburst. Loella sighed. It could have been worse. "Certainly, my king," she began. "As I said, I have been communicating with the Crucian embassy. There is an arrangement in place which, if followed—" "No, Senator! First you will explain how you managed to establish this unauthorized dialogue while we have been maintaining our blockade." Loella sighed. "Very well, though it may be easier for me to talk without wondering if my larynx is about to be ripped open." Aglam shook his head. "You are talking plenty fine now, and you have caught me on a very bad day already. Now explain. The dialogue. What did you do?" Loella flared her facial fins in contempt. "Nothing obtuse. Your blockade has been policing the surface of the seas quite well, but as we both know, you haven't felt the need to establish tight patrols under the water. One of my servants has been exploiting that weakness and managed to find a Draconid scout out on patrol on a different shoreline of Cruz. You must understand, King, that going behind your back like this was precisely what made the Draconids want to listen. I was able to secure the attention of the Archchief herself." King Aglam's trident wasn't moving. "I am fully aware of the Draconid appetite for intrigue. Very well, and what treason did you plot?" Loella's brow furrowed as she insisted. "No treason, my lord. An opportunity. This war started because of an individual. Your stated aim has been to recover Prince Kyrall and avenge ourselves of the attack on the Senate Rotunda. I believe both sides have had their fill of vengeance. As that first goal, I have a way that we can get my husband today and end this senseless death." The mention of Prince Kyrall seemed to finally temper the king's wrath. He withdrew his trident, his guards following suit by putting down their own weapons. "What do the Draconids want, then?" Encouraged by the king's willingness to hear her fully out without a blade to her throat, Loella continued. "Draconid culture is obsessive over the concept of honor and justice, King Aglam. We can use this to—" King Aglam shook his head. "No, they are not. No honorable or just society would sanction or defend with their lives the kind of unprovoked atrocity that claimed my late brother's life." "As with any society, there can be exceptions to the rule," Loella conceded. "But the speed with which you have decided to pursue a full-out confrontation with Cruz without any sort of diplomatic overtures hasn't given us the chance to learn why that attack happened." The king tightened his grip on his trident. "Let's assume for the moment that I don't have the patience to explain what our culture's idea of honor and justice bid me do, Senator. Just what is it that you have agreed to?" Loella caught sight at the passers-by who had come to be transfixed by her dialogue, standing behind the king and his guards. Perfect. As anticipated, the king was too distracted by his temper to care who listened. "The Draconids have agreed to conclude the war through a trial by personal combat." The king's eyes widened, but Loella pushed forward before he could object, explaining, "Each side will send out a single warrior, and according to the customs, the warriors from each side must come from the family or house that gave first cause for bloodshed. In this case, you may be interested to see whom it is that the Draconids have agreed to send out." Loella took a single roll of parchment from a small wooden box on her palanquin. She handed it to one of the king's guards, who then quickly gave it to his liege. King Aglam read the paper, his eyes absorbing every small detail he could. "The Archchief Salast hereby agrees to yield the blood of House Loella to this challenge?" he incredulously repeated as he read the terms. His fins drooped. "Prince Kyrall Loella? He's actually consented to fight for these creatures?" Loella hung her head solemnly. "Yes. The Draconids claim him to be part of their people now, and seeing as it was his departure that seems to have precipitated this conflict, Draconid customs are pretty clear. He is to be their champion." King Aglam didn't seem to react. He was frozen in place, the shock of this news clearly taking its time to settle in. Finally, when he spoke, his voice was much quieter, but perhaps angrier. "So, it is the worst that we feared. Kyrall is a traitor, and guilty of patricide." "We don't know that for sure just yet," Loella quickly interjected. "If he's been somehow taken captive, this may be the only way for him to get in contact with us without Draconid interference, and hopefully escape. We would just need your soldiers on hand to help both of us return safely, as the Draconids likely won't take kindly to his second unannounced departure." King Aglam looked away from Senator Loella towards the ground. "That whole scenario is pure speculation at this point, Senator," he demurred. "I doubt that my nephew has any true merblood in him left, though I appreciate the difficulty you must have experienced with his departure." "I know how I must sound, arguing that my husband really is innocent in all this, but I can only offer my views born out of experience with him. I only knew him for a short time, and though we had our differences, I really don't think that open war against his own people is something he is capable of." Aglam frowned. "And yet, here we are, with no communiques, no hint of where he may be in Stradthyrix." The king leaned forward in his palatine, studying Loella closely. "Tell me, If it came down to it, would you have our warrior kill him if it is discovered that he really has betrayed our people?" Senator Loella resolutely returned Aglam's intense gaze. "I would deal the death blow myself, Aglam. You can see for yourself in the contract. The Draconids yield the blood of House Loella for the House of Loella. Though you be his uncle, you are of House Latrial. I am the only Maeli here of Loella, the closest kin to the offense that started all of this." King Aglam raised an eyebrow and looked at Senator Loella again. "You surprise me. You are comfortable with this? This is more than just trampling on your pacifist ideals, after all. You're talking about potentially killing your own husband." Loella's voice was quiet as she answered, "I am well aware. I actually consider myself more of a utilitarian than a pacifist. War should be the last resort, not the first, and if either he or I should have to die to end a war, so be it." The king looked at Senator Loella as if truly seeing her for the first time, and then rolled his eyes. "Of course. Why wouldn't you think so, after all? Next, I suppose you'll tell me you're really an orc, and that the Draconids are allergic to seahorses." Seeing Loella's confusion, King Aglam explained, "Let's just say that I've had my fair share of surprises recently. But I am afraid that I must refuse. I assume that whichever side loses this duel will have to offer an unconditional surrender." Loella nodded. "Yes." The king shook his head as he expressed his reservations. "Skilled though you are as a hydromancer, you are asking me to gamble our nation's welfare in this war on a death match between you and a rogue prince, who is also a hydromancer, and who has proven his unpredictability. That is not something I can allow." Loella nodded once again. "The Draconids are not interested in plunder or conquest. Should I fall, they would simply ask you to cease hostilities and leave." The king's anger began to simmer once again. "My answer is still no, Senator. I would be a fool to accept the word of a Draconid." Loella gestured to the crowd that had gathered around the king. "And is that what you will tell your people? That you feel more comfortable continuing to sacrifice their lives in this bloodbath, as opposed to bringing this conflict to an end today?" The king's eyes flared with rage at Loella's impudence as he realized what she had done. The crowd gathered around the king's and the senator's palatines and waited with bated breath, hope mixing with uncertainty. Loella had the king exactly where she wanted him, and he knew that. The secret of the duel was out, leaving Aglam with only one choice. The king glared at the senator. "I will always stand by the needs of my people. You had best hope this little duel of yours has been as well planned as this subterfuge. Come with me, and let us ensure your readiness for this sham of a duel." The king leaned forward, whispering in the senator's ear. "Know, though, Loella, that should you die, I will never surrender. So if you really want this peace you speak of, you'll make sure that you either secure your husband safely and bring him home, or end his life with extreme prejudice." And with that, the king's palatine turned and left, with Loella's closely following. As the crowd scrambled over each other to share word of what had happened with their comrades throughout the camp, Loella could only stare forward, hoping beyond hope that she hadn't just made the worst mistake of her life. After a day that was too long and too short at the same time, evening came to the Isle of Cruz, and Senator Loella found herself in the sea once again. She had donned her traditional Maeli battle armor and bore her simple yet sturdy throwing spear. She still was convinced, however, that she had brought her armor and weapon purely for the Draconid's sake. What she had told King Aglam was true. She couldn't imagine that Kyrall would actually ever harm anyone. A dark memory overshadowed Loella. Well, if Kyrall would ever want to harm someone, it would most likely be her. Looking around, Loella saw the different pieces of her plan coming together. She floated in the middle of the waters of the crescent-shaped bay her servant had used to reach the Draconids. The small stretch of water where the bay met the ocean was rimmed with Merfolk soldiers. The southern half of the crescent, closest to the Maeli camp, had dozens of human soldiers, standing smartly at attention. King Aglam's palatine shone brightly in the evening light in front of them. Opposite the Maeli observers on the other side of the bay was their Draconid counterparts. Adorned in black armor painted with occasional patches of red, they seemed a living terrace of molten battlements, spears pitched into the sky like a forest of steel. A fitting, if not intimidating, tribute to their harsh volcanic home. All that awaited this arena was the arrival of Prince Kyrall. Though Senator Loella could not bring herself to share all of King Aglam's doubts, she couldn't ignore her own fears. It had been a long time since the attack on the rotunda. How petrified she was then. How shocked she was to see the prince's painting on the Senate floor. And, with what followed, could Kyrall be truly capable of this? Though they had disagreed on much, they at least had their shared views on violence. And yet, those same views took Loella here, prepared if necessary to kill her husband. Would that not mean Kyrall was also capable of such a paradox? The merman who refused to eat any meat, who was so anxious about how roughly the merfolk treated humans that he insisted on the both of them hiring mercrab palatine bearers? Could that Kyrall also be a murderer? Trumpets directly ahead of her sharply brought Loella's attention to the present. A palatine was being brought forward, black and Spartan in design, unlike the palatines used by the Maeli. It was finally happening. Part of her wished she had set the time for the combat at least a day or two after her arrival to the warfront, but she hadn't wanted to allow King Aglam any time to undo too much of this operation. No, there was no swimming back. No current was harder to swim against than time itself. The black palatine was fronted by a number of other Draconid guards, marching 2 by 2. Once they came through the line of Maeli and Draconid soldiers already posted along the bay, the palatine's guards turned sharply, opening a path for the palatine to come through. The sight that greeted Loella hit her like an arrow to the chest. The person on the palatine wasn't Prince Kyrall. It was a Draconid. Angry murmuring broke forth amongst the Maeli guards. Before anyone could take action, however, the scarlet-scaled Draconid in the palatine flew a short height into the air, her large wings carrying her lithe, shapely frame aloft like a demon from some forgotten nightmare. She cracked a pair of whips loudly in the air, their metal links and dagger-set tips ringing out ominously, silencing the gathered crowd. Death sight take Loella. She had it all wrong. She was going to die. Once the flying Draconid seemed satisfied that she had everyone's attention, she flew out towards Loella. She stopped some 20 paces away and spoke in a loud, commanding tone. "What's the matter, Senator? Expecting someone else?" Loella was speechless, which, considering her prolific career in the Rotunda, was an impressive feat. The Draconid smiled menacingly. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Radka, sister to Archchief Zalast." She paused, relishing the moment. "And wife of Prince Kyrall." It was as if all light and warmth in Loella's breast had suddenly gone out. She had not anticipated anything like this. Everything else had worked. Her months of negotiating, all her planning, her hopes to make things right, all the words she had for Kyrall. It was all nothing now. Zradka continued to project her voice, ensuring all could hear her. "I have come to answer your challenge, Senator Loella Lyell. You have accused Prince Kyrall of abandoning his people and arranging for the murder of his father. For this slander, you will die." Senator Loella found her voice again, and her anger. How? How dare you do this? You cannot possibly expect me or any of us to accept this farce. Prince Kyrall was supposed to. What? Come out here and explain to you why he left your mire of corruption you call home? Zradka laughed mercilessly. He is the only one of your kind that has had the honor to admit to your nation's crimes and seek asylum with us. As my servant, Annex, explained to your senators 9 months ago. A deeper silence still fell over the Maelli. Loella's brow sharpened with a stony focus as she returned Zradka's pitiless gaze with her own icy stare. Zradka did not relent in her denunciation. How typical of you, Maelli! You think me a monster for ordering that attack on your people. You haven't stopped to remember what arrogance brought you here to this war, what crimes you've committed to pave your road to this doom, or whose blood it is that you have soaked your loathsome scales with to swim your way here. King Aglam shouted out his own retort. Draconid deceiver and debaser! Kill her now, Loella! Shouts of agreement rang forth from the gathered Maelli. Zradka cracked her right-handed whip. Silence! You can bleat out whatever lies you wish to your own people on your own time, Aglam. For this one time, however, they will hear the truth. What truth is it that you think could possibly justify anything you've done, Zradka? Loella challenged. What truth could warrant the attack on our late king and the Senate? What truth could possibly give license to the lives that both our peoples have lost in this war? Zradka's sneer turned to a cold, freezing snarl to match Loella's. Her humanoid yet scaly face, devoid of the satisfaction she had been radiating just moments ago. You dare to assume ignorance of what you have done. Only a dragon could truly match your callousness. Loella spread her arms in desperation. Then please tell me, what is it that we have done? Zradka's face lost none of its raw malice as she gave her answer. If you are truly so criminally blind to what you, Maelli, have done, ask your king in the next life. For as soon as I am done slaughtering you here, I will demand his head before I allow any of your kind to leave our shores alive. I may have taken your ex-husband, but none of you can ever hurt enough for Drayor's Isle." And then she attacked. Loella saw the emblem of the god shard of fire blaze on the back of Zdradka's right hand as her whips began to glow with orange flame. Zdradka dove towards Loella like a falcon for her prey, lashing her whips towards the senator with a sharp, deafening crack. Though Loella had already moved to easily dive away before the chain whips could reach her, she was suddenly hit with searing, blinding pain in her right shoulder as she was turning. Instinctively, she willed her own god shard to pull the water above her, her right hand's glyph of waters glowing as she saw her own purple blood filling the water in front of her like ink from an octopus. What in the name of the Dread King had happened? The whips hadn't even touched her. And yet, whatever had hit her was still burning her. But how? She looked at her shoulder, willing the water with her god shard to clear away the blood so she could see. She saw 2 punctures the size of the smallest of beads in her right shoulder pauldron. Something had shot through it and buried itself into her arm. Screaming in pain, she willed the water near her shoulder to pull out whatever was in there, and, a painful half-second later, she saw 2 small, glowing red shards of metal floating in the water by her shoulder, cooling to a dull black as they drifted slowly to the floor of the bay. Zdradka hadn't missed. She must have melted the metal at the ends of her whips. The sharp ends Loella had thought were daggers, those weren't just for slicing away at a foe. She had whipped molten metal at Loella, like water from a damp rope. Panic told Loella she couldn't stay. She had to move, prevent Zdradka from having an easy target yet again. And surely enough, as Loella used both her fins and her god shard to propel her from her now fading patch of diluted underwater blood, she heard 2 more molten bullets speed their way into the water, barely missing Loella's tail fin. By the Daean, this draconid could aim. Loella's mind raced as she zipped and zagged in the bay water in what she hoped was an unpredictable path. She heard other projectiles hitting the water as she swam, missing her, but not by much. Death sight take all of this. Zdradka had thought of everything. Sure, Loella had the bay water, but since the waters here were so shallow, she had no cover from Zdradka's volley of searing metal. Unless... Loella willed her god shard to dig up the sand and silt below her as she darted and flitted away from Zdradka's attack. As the water around her became dark with the upturned silt, she was quick to expand her gritty smokescreen. And, though Loella could not perfectly hear what was going on above the surface of the water, she could swear she heard her enemy roar in disbelieving frustration. And while her god shard allowed her to feel and sense where the water was around her, so as to avoid any potential underwater obstacles, Loella knew that she had handicapped herself as well as her adversary. She wouldn't be able to get a shot at Zdradka with her own spear without resurfacing. The immediate danger of being shot at again having passed, she stopped, resting on the bay floor so as to maximize the efficacy of her camouflage. There was only one option that Loella could think of. Some several paces away from herself, she willed the water to burst upward into the air. Then, almost as quickly, she caused another large splash of water, even further away. Let's just see if that lizard can find me before I find her, Loella thought. And just after a third decoy splash, Loella shot herself into the air with her god shard, spinning to see where Zdradka was. She was hovering not too far from her initial location where moments ago she had been taunting her and the Maeli, darting her head around to each splash. By the time Zdradka had spotted Loella, the senator had thrown her spear with a torrent of water to propel it like a massive bolt from a Bastille. The Draconid screeched as she saw the bolt fly to her, but Loella was under the water again before she could confirm the hit. Again, a decoy splash here, another there. Loella darted to another random spot, then, on another flash of inspiration, doubled back to where she was pretty sure she had been just when she last launched herself. Let's see if Zdradka will anticipate an attack from the exact same place. And in the midst of another flurry of decoy splashes, Loella shot out of the air again, twisting and looking up to see where Zdradka had gone. Alarm shot through her, as Zdradka was nowhere to be seen. Then, the rushing water behind her was filled by two more searing bolts of pain, this time in Loella's side. The senator knew she had never felt pain like these molten bolts before. Yet, somehow, knowing that death itself was stalking her, that at any second she could be swallowed by oblivion, it made the pain take a step to the side, not fully off the stage of her consciousness, but waiting in the background. No time to think about whether or not to pull the last shards of metal out. The only way she was getting out of this death trap was to think faster than Zdradka. With Zdradka skimming just above the water's surface as she was, Loella would not be able to repeat her decoy splash strategy. But maybe she wouldn't have to. I only need one clean hit, Loella told herself. Just one clean hit. Loella went ahead and shot up a number of other decoy splashes to make it appear as if she was going to dart out of the water again. As she did so, she reached out her God Shard's influence through the water, listening, studying for anything irregular. And, quickly enough, she found it. Rippling water going against the current, without Loella's direction, just paces away from where she was at the moment. Loella hurtled her spear towards her target, again willing the clouded waters to propel her spear further. And this time, certain of her aim, she rose her head above the water and saw her silvery weapon tear through her quarry. A roar of shock and pain burst forth from Zdradka as she fell into the water. Loella gasped in exultation and in surprise at the sight. She had done it. But before she could act any further, the pain in Loella's side took stage center again, sending Loella reeling, dropping beneath the water, before all went dark. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a rating for us to let us know what you liked in this episode. You can also support us on patreon.com. Just look for Mundaria Legends or use the link in the description. And remember, one of the simplest, easiest ways you can support us is simply by letting a friend know about the show. Thank you again so much for listening, especially as we just get started. Stay safe and remember, you can't see the hero if you don't know the monster.